Drummerly.com Unlimited Drama Series.
The text message still glowed on my phone screen when I walked out of that godforsaken gas station, coffee in hand, expecting to see my wife's silver Honda and her father's black SUV where I'd left them 5 minutes ago. Instead, I found empty asphalt and the sound of my own heartbeat drowning out the storm warnings on the radio. What the hell? I muttered, spinning around like some tourist who'd lost his tour group. The parking lot stretched before me, occupied by a rusted pickup and a semi-truck, but no sign of my family. No sign of the people I'd driven 300 miles with to reach Sasha's family cabin for what her father, Art, had called quality bonding time. My phone buzzed. Sasha's name appeared with a message that made my blood freeze. LOL. Dad's idea. Family prank. Find your own way home. I stared at the screen, reading it twice, then 3 times. The coffee cup slipped from my grip, splashing across my boots in the wet pavement. A family prank. They'd left me stranded at a gas station in the middle of nowhere, with storm clouds gathering overhead like some biblical warning, because Art Madsen thought it would be funny. My phone exploded with messages from the family group chat. Chris, Sasha's golden boy brother, chimed in. Bet he cries. Linda, her mother, added, Oh, you boys and your games. Even Greg Turner, the family friend who'd somehow wormed his way into this trip, threw in his 2 cents. Hope Tom's got his hiking boots. The rain started then, fat drops that splattered against my face as I stood there like an idiot, holding my phone and watching my wife's family mock me in real time. Thunder rolled across the sky, and I felt something cold settle in my chest that had nothing to do with the weather. Tom Haywood, 38 years old, HVAC contractor, husband of 7 years, officially abandoned by his in-laws for their entertainment. If I had $1 for every time my wife thought her dad was funny, I could Uber home in a limo. But as I stood there in the rain, watching those laughing emoji faces fill my screen, I felt my mouth curve into something that wasn't quite a smile. Art Madsen wanted to play games? Fine, let's play. I walked back into the gas station, water dripping from my jacket, and approached the bored-looking clerk behind bulletproof glass. You got a phone book? I need to call a tow service. Everything okay, buddy? The clerk asked, eyeing my soaked appearance. Just peachy, I said, pulling out my credit card. My family thinks I'm soft. Time to show them what hard really looks like. Big Mike's towing charged me triple for the emergency call, but his truck showed up within 30 minutes, rumbling through the storm like some mechanical savior. Mike himself was a mountain of a man with grease-stained coveralls and the kind of handshake that could crack walnuts. Where are we headed? He asked as I climbed into the cab, grateful for the heater blasting against my face. Car rental place first, I said. Then I need to get to Lake Winnebago, fast. Mike raised an eyebrow. In this weather? You got a death wish? Something like that, I muttered, checking my phone. The family group chat had gone quiet, probably too busy laughing at their own cleverness to keep rubbing salt in the wound. But I'd screenshotted every message, every laughing emoji, every cruel joke at my expense. Evidence for later. The rental place was closing when we arrived, but a $100 tip convinced the manager to stay open long enough to get me keys to a black SUV with 4-wheel drive. As I signed the paperwork, my phone buzzed with a message from Sasha. Don't be mad, honey. Dad just wanted to toughen you up a little. We'll see you at home tomorrow. Toughen me up. Like I hadn't spent the last 15 years crawling through attics and basements, fixing broken heating systems for people who treated me like hired help. Like I hadn't worked 60-hour weeks to help pay for the house Sasha loved so much. The one with the mortgage that kept me awake at night. I typed back, Don't wait up. Then I turned off my phone and drove into the storm. The cabin sat on 40 acres of wooded land that Art had inherited from his father. A rustic retreat where the Madsen family had spent summers for 3 generations. I'd been there enough times to know the layout, to remember where Art kept the spare key hidden under the fake rock by the porch. More importantly, I remembered copying that key 6 months ago, during our last visit, when Art had made one too many jokes about my blue-collar limitations. The storm was getting worse by the time I reached the gravel road leading to the cabin. Rain hammered the windshield, and the SUV's headlights carved through darkness thick as soup. Perfect weather for what I had in mind. I parked a quarter-mile away and walked the rest of the distance, using my phone's flashlight to navigate the familiar path. The cabin sat dark and empty, waiting for its guests who were probably still driving through this mess, cursing the weather and maybe starting to regret their little prank. The spare key worked perfectly. I slipped inside, moving through rooms I knew by heart. Art's pride and joy, this place, with its stone fireplace and mounted deer heads and framed photos of Madsen family fishing trips that never included me. The perfect setting for a little payback. I started with the breaker box in the basement, flipping the switch that controlled the main heating system. The furnace died with a mechanical sigh, leaving the cabin to the mercy of the storm. Next, I found the water heater and turned down the temperature until it barely registered above freezing. Not enough to cause damage, but enough to make hot showers a distant memory. In the main room, I gathered every blanket, every throw pillow, every piece of fabric that might provide warmth or comfort. These went into the storage shed behind the cabin, along with most of the food from the pantry and refrigerator. I left just enough to make it look normal at first glance, but not enough to sustain 5 adults for more than a few hours. The final touch was a small note tucked inside the breaker box where they'd eventually find it. Try flipping this one, genius. Your soft son-in-law. By the time I finished, the storm was howling like a living thing, rattling the cabin's windows and sending tree branches scraping across the roof. I locked up, replaced the key, and drove back through the chaos to the nearest town, where a warm hotel room and room service waited. From my comfortable bed, I sent a selfie to the family group chat. Relaxing weekend. Sometimes being abandoned is a blessing. Then I ordered a steak dinner and settled in to wait for the fun to begin. The first panicked text came at 11:30 that night. Tom, the heat isn't working. It's freezing in here. I was halfway through a perfectly cooked ribeye, watching the storm coverage on the hotel room TV, when Sasha's message lit up my phone. I took another bite, chewed slowly, and typed back, Have you tried turning it off and on again? This isn't funny. We can't find any blankets, and there's barely any food. Sounds like a real adventure, I replied. Isn't that what you wanted? To toughen me up? The group chat exploded after that. Art demanding I stop playing games and tell them how to fix the heat. Linda crying about being cold and hungry. Chris whining that his phone battery was dying and he couldn't find a charger. Greg, notably, stayed quiet, probably realizing he'd picked the wrong family to suck up to. I let them stew for an hour before responding. Heat's probably just a breaker. Check the basement. Food's probably in the shed. You're all smart people, figure it out. But I'd hidden that note well, and the shed was locked with a combination they didn't know. Let them work for it. The storm raged for 2 days, trapping them in that freezing cabin while I enjoyed room service, hot showers, and cable TV. Every few hours, I'd post another selfie to the group chat. Me eating breakfast in bed, me in the hotel's heated pool, me raising a toast to the camera with the caption, Not all storms are bad. Some just clear out the trash. By the second day, the messages had turned desperate. Sasha begging me to help, Linda sobbing about her arthritis, acting up in the cold, even Art's pride cracking as he admitted they might have taken the joke too far. Chris had apparently tried to make a run for his car and ended up stuck in a snowdrift, soaked and shivering. That's when they finally found my note in the breaker box. Art's call came at 6 in the morning, his voice shaking with cold and rage. You son of a bitch! You did this on purpose. Did what? I asked innocently, sipping coffee from my warm hotel room. I'm 300 miles away, remember? You left me at a gas station. The heat, the food, all of it. This is kidnapping. This is what you wanted, I interrupted, my voice going cold. You wanted to see how the other half lives. Congratulations, Art. You're living it. When I get my hands on you, you'll what? Abandoned me somewhere else? Been there, done that. I hung up and blocked his number. Old Joe, the cabin's caretaker, called an hour later. Your family's asking me to help them out. You want me to? Let them shiver, I said. They'll figure it out eventually. Or they won't. Either way, they'll learn something about consequences. The storm finally broke on the third day. I watched the weather reports, tracking the clearing skies, and knew my time was almost up. Soon they'd find the food in the shed, get the heat working, and limp back to civilization with their tails between their legs. But I wasn't done. Not even close. My phone buzzed with a text from Sasha. Please come home. We need to talk. I'm sorry. I stared at the message for a long time, remembering 7 years of marriage, of trying to fit in with her family, of swallowing Art's insults and Linda's passive-aggressive comments and Chris's smug superiority, of being the outsider, the blue-collar husband who wasn't quite good enough for their precious daughter. Talk is cheap, I typed back. So is your loyalty. Then I checked out of the hotel and drove home, taking my time, planning my next move. The real game was just beginning. They beat me home by 2 hours. I could tell because Sasha's Honda was in the driveway, and I could see movement through the kitchen window as I pulled up. The house looked normal from the outside, but I knew that was about to change. I walked in to find Sasha pacing the living room, her hair unwashed, dark circles under her eyes. She looked like she'd aged 5 years in 3 days, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Tom, thank God you're home, she said, rushing toward me with her arms outstretched. We need to talk about what happened. Dad feels terrible, we all do. It was just supposed to be a harmless prank. I stepped aside, avoiding her embrace. Harmless, I repeated, setting my keys on the kitchen counter with deliberate calm. You left me to die in a storm for laughs. Let's call it even. You weren't going to die, she protested. It was just what? Just a joke? Just a way to put the working-class husband in his place? I turned to face her, and she stepped back at whatever she saw in my eyes. How was the cold, Sasha? How was sleeping on a wooden floor with no blankets? How was rationing crackers and warm beer? Her face crumpled. It was awful. We were miserable. But that doesn't excuse what you did. Sabotaging the cabin, leaving us to freeze. I didn't leave you anywhere, I said quietly. You left me at a gas station, in a storm, for your family's entertainment. She tried to argue, to justify, to minimize, but I wasn't listening anymore. I was thinking about Mrs. Ruzicka, our neighbor, who'd probably seen the cars come home. Mrs. Ruzicka, who knew everyone's business and shared it freely at the grocery store, the post office, the church social hall. By tomorrow, half the town would know about the Madsen family's harmless prank and how it had backfired spectacularly. That night, while Sasha slept off her ordeal, I sat in my home office and did some digging. Call it professional curiosity, or maybe just the need to understand how deep the betrayal went. I started with her phone, which she'd left charging on the kitchen counter, the same phone that had been buzzing constantly during our trip to the cabin. What I found made my blood turn to ice water. Text messages between Sasha and Greg Turner, dating back 6 months. Messages that started friendly and professional. Greg was handling some real estate investments for the Madsen family, but quickly turned personal, then intimate, then explicit. Photos. Hotel receipts charged to Greg's business account. Plans for weekend getaways that coincided perfectly with my work trips out of town. And most damning of all, messages from the week before our cabin trip, where Greg complained about me tagging along, and Sasha reassured him that her dad would handle it. The prank hadn't been about toughening me up. It had been about getting me out of the way, so Sasha and Greg could spend the weekend at the Marriott in Madison, using the family cabin as cover. My abandonment at that gas station hadn't been cruel humor. It had been calculated adultery. I screenshotted everything, uploaded it to a secure cloud account, and made backup copies on 3 different drives. Then, I sat back in my chair and laughed until my sides hurt, because the cosmic joke was just too perfect. They'd tried to humiliate me, and instead, they'd handed me enough ammunition to destroy them all. But I was going to do this right. Methodically, completely. The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove to Greg's real estate office, a glass-fronted building in the upscale part of town where he sold overpriced houses to people with more money than sense. I found him in his corner office, feet up on his desk, talking loudly into his Bluetooth headset about closing ratios and market penetration. He looked up when I walked in and his face went pale. Tom, hey man, how's it going? I heard about the cabin trip. That was just, I slapped him hard. The sound echoed through the office like a gunshot, and his headset went flying. He tumbled backward in his chair, one hand pressed to his reddening cheek, staring at me in shock. You want to know how it's going, Greg? I asked conversationally, pulling out my phone and showing him the screenshots. It's going great. Really educational weekend. Learned a lot about my wife's extracurricular activities. He tried to stammer out denials, explanations, justifications, but I wasn't interested. I leaned over his desk, close enough to smell his expensive cologne and his fear sweat, and spoke quietly. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to stop seeing my wife. You're going to stop texting her, calling her, thinking about her. You're going to disappear from her life so completely that she'll wonder if she imagined you. And if you don't, these photos and
I was drunk. I didn't know what I was doing.
Drunk? I have everything on video.
Watch more on Grammarly.com.
messages are going to find their way to your wife, your clients, and that real estate licensing board you're so proud of. Are we clear? He nodded frantically, still holding his cheek. Good, I said, straightening up. Oh, and Greg, if I were you, I'd check my car before driving home tonight. You never know what kind of damage a storm can do. I left him there, shaking and defeated, and drove to the bank. Time to protect my assets before Sasha figured out what was happening. The divorce papers were filed by Thursday. I had them served at Sasha's office during her lunch break, right in the middle of the HR department where she worked, surrounded by coworkers who'd heard her brag about her perfect marriage for years. The process server was a pleasant woman named Janet, who treated it like any other business transaction. But the effect was devastating. Sasha called me 17 times that afternoon. I let every call go to voicemail. By Friday, Mrs. Ruzicka had spread the story of our family prank to half the neighborhood, but with interesting embellishments. In her version, the Madsen family had abandoned their son-in-law in a blizzard as a joke, then gotten trapped in their cabin when karma struck back. The story grew with each telling, becoming more dramatic and damning with every iteration. Art called Saturday morning, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. You need to stop this, Tom. Linda's friends are calling, asking questions. People at the country club are talking. This is getting out of hand. Is it? I asked, genuinely curious. What exactly is getting out of hand, Art? The fact that people know what you did or the fact that you did it in the first place? It was a prank. A harmless... Nothing about it was harmless, I interrupted. You left me stranded in a storm because you thought it would be funny? Because you wanted to humiliate me. Well, congratulations. You succeeded. But you forgot something important. What's that? I'm not the same soft pushover you've been bullying for 7 years. I've learned some things about consequences, about payback, about what happens when you push someone too far. I hung up and got back to work. Greg's car had been an artistic masterpiece. I'd waited until midnight, then used my lockpicking skills, learned during my apprenticeship days, to get into his precious BMW, a few pounds of fish heads in the trunk, courtesy of the bait shop. Cheater keyed into the driver's side door. And for the grand finale, I'd superglued a printed copy of his sexts with my wife to his windshield, right where everyone could see it. His wife found it first, according to Mrs. Ruzicka, who'd heard it from her cousin who lived in Greg's neighborhood. The screaming match on their front lawn had provided entertainment for the entire cul-de-sac, ending with Greg's suitcases flying out the front door and landing in the rose bushes. But I wasn't done with the Turner family yet. Sunday afternoon, I drove to their house, a McMansion in a development where every lawn looked like a golf course and every driveway held a luxury car. Greg's BMW was gone, but his wife's Mercedes sat in front of the 3-car garage, and I could see movement through the kitchen window. I rang the doorbell and waited. When Carol Turner answered, her eyes red from crying, I felt a stab of genuine sympathy. She was collateral damage in this war, an innocent victim of her husband's betrayal. Mrs. Turner, my name is Tom Haywood. I think we need to talk. She invited me in, made coffee, and listened with growing horror as I showed her the evidence of her husband's affair. The photos, the messages, the hotel receipts. I was gentle but thorough, letting the facts speak for themselves. I'm sorry you had to find out this way, I said when I finished. But I thought you deserved to know the truth. She stared at the printed screenshots, her hands shaking. How long? At least 6 months, maybe longer. And your wife? I'm divorcing her. The papers were filed Thursday. Carol Turner nodded slowly, and when she looked up, her eyes held the same cold determination I'd been feeling all week. Thank you for telling me. Greg's been lying about where our money's been going, making excuses about business expenses. Now, I know why. I left her with copies of everything, knowing she'd use them well. Greg Turner was about to discover what a really expensive divorce looked like. By Monday morning, the story had reached Art's Country Club. I knew because he called me at 7 a.m., practically screaming into the phone. They kicked me out. 30 years of membership, and they kicked me out because of some gossip about a family prank. That's terrible, I said, not meaning a word of it. Maybe you should have thought about that before you left me in a storm. This has gone too far. I'm calling a lawyer. You do that, Art. Make sure to tell him about the part where you abandoned your son-in-law at a gas station during a weather emergency. I'm sure he'll be fascinated by the liability issues. The truth was, I'd already consulted with 3 different attorneys, and they'd all told me the same thing. What the Madsen family had done was legally questionable at best, potentially criminal at worst. Abandonment, reckless endangerment, maybe even kidnapping if you stretch the definition. Not that I planned to press charges. Public humiliation was so much more satisfying than legal victories. Chris, Sasha's golden boy brother, made his own contribution to the family's downfall that week. In a fit of righteous indignation, he posted a TikTok video defending the harmless family prank and calling me a psycho for my overreaction. The video went viral, but not in the way he'd intended. The comments section became a battlefield, with thousands of people sharing their own stories of family betrayal and in-law abuse. Chris was dragged mercilessly. His employer was tagged repeatedly, and by Wednesday he'd been let go from his marketing job due to social media concerns. The video was still up, still gathering negative comments, when I checked it Friday morning. Chris had tried to defend himself in the comments, but every response just made him look worse. His girlfriend had left him, according to Sasha's tearful phone calls, and he was living in his parents' basement, unemployed and unemployable. Perfect. The confrontation I'd been expecting finally came on a Saturday night in late November, 3 months after the cabin incident. I was in my workshop rebuilding a carburetor for my old pickup truck when I heard cars pulling into my driveway. Through the window, I could see Sasha's Honda and an unfamiliar sedan, their headlights cutting through the darkness. I wiped my hands on a rag and walked to the front door, unsurprised to find Sasha and Greg standing on my porch. They looked terrible. Sasha pale and thin, Greg nervous and twitchy. The storm that had been threatening all day was finally starting. Fat raindrops spattering the walkway behind them. Tom, we need to talk, Sasha said, her voice shaking. Please, just give us 5 minutes. I considered slamming the door in their faces, but curiosity won out. 5 minutes, I said, stepping aside to let them in. But make it quick. I've got work to do. They followed me into the living room, the same room where Sasha had tried to apologize 3 months ago before I discovered the full extent of her betrayal. Greg hung back by the door, looking like he wanted to bolt, while Sasha perched on the edge of the couch we'd picked out together during our 2nd year of marriage. The divorce is final next week, she said without preamble. And I know you hate me. I know you have every right to hate me. But I need you to understand something. I'm listening, I said, settling into my recliner and crossing my arms. I never meant for any of this to happen. The cabin thing, the prank, that was all Dad's idea. I tried to talk him out of it, but you know how he is when he gets an idea in his head. And the affair? I asked quietly. Was that his idea too? She flinched like I'd slapped her. That was a mistake. A terrible mistake. I was lonely and you were working so much and Greg was there and you decided to screw him behind my back for 6 months, I finished. Yeah, I got that part. Greg finally found his voice. Look, Tom, I know you're angry, but what you've done to us, to our families, it's gone too far. Sasha's lost half her friends. I'm sleeping in my office because my wife changed the locks. Chris can't find work anywhere in town. You've destroyed our lives over a stupid prank. I looked at him for a long moment, this man who'd been sleeping with my wife while pretending to be my friend, and felt something cold and final settle in my chest. You think this is about a prank? I asked, standing up slowly. You think I care about being left at a gas station? Isn't it? Sasha asked hopefully. I walked to the window, watching the storm gather strength outside. Lightning flickered in the distance, and thunder rumbled across the sky, like a promise of violence to come. The prank was just the beginning, I said without turning around. It was the moment I realized that my wife's family, and my wife herself, saw me as nothing more than entertainment, a joke, someone to be humiliated for their amusement. That's not true, Sasha protested. Isn't it? I turned back to face them. Your father has spent 7 years treating me like hired help. Your mother makes passive-aggressive comments about my job, my clothes, my education. Your brother acts like I'm some kind of charity case you took pity on. And you, Sasha, you stood by and let it happen. You participated in it. I never... You left me in a storm, I shouted, the words exploding out of me with months of pent-up rage. You sat in that car with your family and your boyfriend and drove away, leaving me stranded 300 miles from home because your daddy thought it would be funny. The room went silent except for the sound of rain beginning to patter against the windows. Sasha was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks, and Greg looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. But here's the thing, I continued, my voice dropping back to conversational level. I'm not the same man you left at that gas station. That man was soft, forgiving, willing to take whatever abuse your family dished out in the name of keeping the peace. This man, I gestured to myself, this man learned something important about consequences. Tom, please, Sasha whispered. I know I hurt you. I know we all hurt you. But can't we find a way to move past this? Can't we move past it? I laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. You want to move past it? Fine. Let's move past it right now. I walked to the front door and held it open. Rain was coming down harder now, and the wind was picking up, bending the trees in my front yard. Get out, I said simply. Both of you. Get out of my house, get out of my life, and get out of my town. I'm done with all of you. Greg didn't need to be told twice. He practically ran for the door, but Sasha remained on the couch, staring at me with desperate eyes. Tom, you can't mean that. 7 years of marriage, all those plans we made, you threw those away when you decided Greg's bed was more comfortable than mine, I said coldly. You threw them away when you helped your family humiliate me. You threw them away when you chose them over me, over and over again, for 7 years. She stood up slowly, moving toward me with her hands outstretched. Please, I love you. I know I made mistakes, but I love you. No, I said, stepping back. You love the idea of me. The stable husband, the steady paycheck, the guy who will put up with your family's abuse without fighting back. But you never loved me. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the tears on her face. Thunder followed immediately, close enough to shake the windows. I did love you, she whispered. I still do. Then you should have acted like it, I said. You should have defended me when your father made his jokes. You should have shut down your mother's comments. You should have told your brother to show some respect. And you sure as hell shouldn't have been screwing Greg Turner while I was working 60-hour weeks to pay for this house. She flinched at each accusation, but she didn't deny any of them. How could she? We both knew they were true. The divorce is final Monday, I continued. You get half the savings, but I keep the house. Greg's wife is taking him for everything he's worth, so I hope you two lovebirds have somewhere to live. Your father's been blackballed from every decent establishment in town. Your mother's friends won't return her calls, and your brother's about as employable as a registered sex offender. Congratulations, Sasha. You got exactly what you deserved. She walked to the door then, moving like an old woman, all the fight gone out of her. At the threshold, she turned back one last time. I'm sorry, she said, for all of it. I'm truly sorry. I know you are, I replied. But sorry doesn't fix anything. Sorry doesn't undo the betrayal. Sorry is just a word people use when they get caught. She nodded, tears streaming down her face, and walked out into the storm. Greg was already in his car, engine running, waiting for her. I watched from the doorway as she got into the passenger seat, and then they drove away, their taillights disappearing into the rain and darkness. I stood there for a long time, listening to the storm rage outside, feeling something that might have been peace settling over me. The house was quiet, clean, mine. No more passive-aggressive comments, no more family gatherings where I was the outsider, no more pretending that people who hated me were family. Mrs. Ruzicka's porch light came on across the street, and I could see her silhouette in the window, probably watching the drama unfold. By tomorrow, the whole neighborhood would know about Sasha's final visit, about the shouting match, about the way she'd left crying in the rain. The story would spread as stories do in small towns, growing and changing with each telling until it became legend. The man whose wife's family tried to break him, only to discover he was stronger than they'd ever imagined. The man who turned their cruelty back on them, who made them pay for every insult, every humiliation, every moment of casual abuse they'd inflicted over the years. I closed the door, locked it, and went back to my workshop. The carburetor wasn't going to rebuild itself, and I had work to do. Real work, honest work, the kind that built things instead of tearing them down. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside my house now, truly mine, everything was calm. Everything was exactly as it should be. Funny thing about storms, I thought as I picked up my wrench and got back to work. They blow away everything you don't need.